Teddy, darling.
Hi, Teddy.
Teddy, I know you were having a bit of a snooze, but it's time to get to work now. You having yeah, okay. Are you we're going to introduce our program, Pet Talk. Are you ready? Are you ready? Do you think?
Yeah.
Okay, all right then. So, do you remember how it goes? Hello and welcome to Pet Talk. That's it. Great. With me, Anna, and what's your name? Can we have your name, please? That's it. Okay. And now, do you remember we were talking about our guest who's going to be talking about your favorite subject, food? And do you remember her name? Yes. Okay. So what's her name? What's her name? That's right. It's Alexia Mellor, and she is here to talk to us about food. Teddy, I think, is studying to be a chef in his next lifetime. So
Amazing.
I'm sure that whatever you say is going to be very helpful to him.
Well, thank you both for having me. I'm really excited to join you.
It's wonderful because we, when we have animals in our lives, we really at first are very much at a loss as to what to feed them. And we go into pet shops or we're in supermarkets, and there's this array of what looks like attractively packaged food. And we have no idea, firstly, what it is that our dogs need. Is it just dogs that you work with, Alexia?
At the moment, yes, it is.
Yes.
Mhm.
So, I remember when I first when Teddy first arrived and thinking, what do I feed my puppy? And doing lots of research. So what do we feed our dogs? What is it that their bodies actually need?
I think it might be helpful to kind of take a step back first and ask, what is a dog? And I think if we start to understand how a dog has evolved, then we have a better understanding of what their biological needs are. And I'll give you a kind of rundown of what dogs generally need, but I really want to place a couple of caveats around this. One, there is no one right way to feed your dog. Every dog is an individual. So I always, when I'm working with clients in my canine nutrition practice, I always look at the dog in front of me and invite my clients to do the same. That although we're using guidelines, they're just guidelines. So you adjust according to your dog. But one of the things that I can totally relate to what you were saying, Anna, about when the dog first comes to you and you're like, what on earth do you do? That was my journey into canine nutrition. My dog Lucky literally showed up on my doorstep during the pandemic, and I was asked, can you foster this dog? I had no preparation for having a dog. I didn't know what they needed. I was doing all the Googling and feeling really, really overwhelmed. So that is what kind of catalyzed me going down this path. And especially because he had health challenges that required me to start to look at nutrition differently. So when I'm approaching nutrition, I start with, what is a dog? A dog is what we call a facultative carnivore. And that sounds kind of like fancy terminology, but what it really means is that dogs are ultimately carnivores that have evolved to be able to scavenge and to tolerate some elements of starch. They are not designed to thrive on starch. They have no biological need for carbohydrates. Where they get the majority of their nutrients and their energy from is first from fats and second from protein. When we're going to approach, what do I want to feed them? We have to have that in the back of our minds, that their jaws are set up as hinges in order to, and you look at their back teeth, they're called carnassial teeth. Those teeth are specifically designed to crunch and crush through bone and tear off sinews. Their jaws can't move side to side. Any animal that is designed to benefit from a lot of plant matter, like us, we have jaws and flat teeth in the back and jaws that can move side to side. Dogs can't do that. They also have a short digestive tract. So that's also indicative of an animal that doesn't do well with too many carbohydrates. When you look at like a cow, for example, that has multiple stomachs, that's because it takes a lot to actually break down plant matter and extract the nutrients from it. Dogs also have really high stomach acid. So they are designed to dissolve bone, meat, handle pathogens, that sort of a thing. So, and they don't have any salivary amylase. Amylase is an enzyme that breaks down starch. We have a lot of amylase in our saliva. So for us, the digestive process starts as soon as we put something in our mouths. You start to salivate, we start to chew and break it down right from the get-go. Most dogs have very little, some breeds have no digestive amylase. So that's another indication that they aren't designed to thrive off of carbohydrates. So when you kind of put those puzzle pieces together, we start to understand what a dog is designed to eat and also what the problems are with the modern dog diet. That when you start to look at the way that we have been sold this idea that it's too hard to feed your dog, and that dogs need to have pre-packaged, which is ultimately ultra-processed food, kibble. Kibble is made of at least 60% carbohydrates. And it has to be in order to be extruded into the pellet form and to hold that form. You have to have carbs in there. So, and they're not the kinds of carbs that I would necessarily recommend for a dog in terms of supporting the gut microbiome with fiber. It's grains, it's high sugar, starchy carbs. So this is where we start to see obesity becoming an issue. We start to see various health challenges becoming an issue, inflammation. Yeast is often contributed by high starchy diets. So we start to see that we have been taught to feed dogs in a way that is actually counter to what their biology is set up to be able to thrive on. So when we're looking at what should a dog eat, it's primarily animal protein and animal fats. That's what we want to start with. But I can walk you through, maybe you can ask me some questions about what that looks like. Because I understand that a lot of people are afraid. They don't know how to make those kinds of decisions. And when we start to hear things like balanced and complete is dangerous, we'd have to have complete and balanced. And just to kind of preface, complete and balanced is a marketing term. It's not an actual scientific term that's used to determine what needs to be in a diet. But I think what we ultimately want to be looking at is understanding the general, for me anyways, and again, there's no one way to feed a dog, but for me, what's important is understanding the approximate ratios of what a dog needs from each category of food. And you make sure that you are providing a variety of options to the dog so that just like we eat, right? So that we're told, stay away from ultra processed foods, eat as many whole foods as possible, eat a variety of foods, eat the rainbow. All of this stuff applies to our dogs too, but understanding that what they do best with is animal proteins and fats.
That's brilliant because that makes it very clear. It's very simple. If you're feeding your animal meat with fat, you're already on the right track. And it's got to be meat that you recognize as meat, not kibble, which has been so highly processed that it is mostly carbohydrate now, along with, all the other stuff that they put in there, which is not appropriate for dogs at all. So that's actually very, very simple. And I guess the thing that comes to mind is, when we talk about a variety, so are we talking about a variety of meats to begin with, so that they're not just eating one protein?
Yeah. Yeah. So why don't I give you a kind of overview of how
Yeah.
I look at the diet and what goes into it? Because I think this might answer some of the questions too, both from the kind of veterinary community that might have some fear around fresh feeding, and also from people who are wanting to DIY their dog's food and want to make sure that they have everything in there. So you know that you are giving your dog the variety that it needs. So we start off, and again, I just want to preface, there is no one right way to do any of this. These are guidelines. So we use this as a basis, and then you always adjust to your diet. And what I'm going to be talking about is specifically for adult dogs. We look at puppies a little bit differently, and also for healthy dogs. So if a dog has a health condition, you are going to need to modify according to the health condition. And that's where you'd want to be working with a professional to help support that. But the sort of general understanding is, if you might have heard of, if you're in the raw feeding community, and I'll clarify a term that I'm using as well. I talk about fresh feeding. And what I mean about fresh feeding is either raw or gently cooked. Raw doesn't work for every dog. And that's why I say that. So the important thing is fresh foods. And I can talk about some cases where some dogs, my dog Lucky doesn't do very well on raw. And I can talk about how I think through some of this. But the importance is gently cooked, raw, fresh food. That's where your dog is going to be able to obtain the most nutrients from. But we look at roughly 80% muscle meat. Muscle meat, I'm going to talk about your base. Your base is roughly 80% muscle meat. Muscle meat is meat that you would recognize as meat going to the grocery store. It also includes things like heart, which is a muscular organ, lung, that kind of a thing. Then we start to look at organ meat. Organ meat is a dog's multivitamin, but you don't need a lot of it. So we look at roughly 5% liver, and 5% a second secreting organ. So secreting organs are organs in the body that secrete things like hormones, for example. Kidneys are a great example, pancreas, testicles, like all the kind of gross bits, right? Those are the secondary secreting organs. But they are really, really beneficial for dogs. The other component of your base is 10% raw meaty bone. So I have seen dogs that are not fed any kind of bone, and that's an issue when we're talking about fresh feeding. They need the calcium source, they need the phosphorus from it. You need it for balancing all kinds of things in the body, not just for teeth and not just for looking at the poos. So that is your important base, but it's just a base. That is what makes up, if you're going to a store and you're buying a commercial 80-10-10. That's what the 80-10-10 means. But that isn't complete. That's not providing everything that a dog needs. So that's your base, it's your starting point. I refer to these other components as essential additions. They're not optional, they're essential additions. You want to make sure that you're including a small oily fish. So something like sardines, mackerels, sprats. We tend to want it small, like lower on the food chain. I tend to personally stay away from salmon. It's higher up on the food chain, which means that it has had the opportunity to eat other fish that might have issues like pollutants, mercury, etc. It's also, from a traditional Chinese medicine perspective, a hot protein. So if you have a dog with some kind of intolerances or seeming like allergies, that can exacerbate the problem. So I'm always cautious with salmon. But you want an oily fish that is going to be giving you not only omega-3 fatty acids in the form that dogs can best make use of it. So when we hear about like flaxseed for us and chia seed, those are great, but dogs don't have the ability to convert that form of omega-3 very well. So they do better with marine sources. So we've got the fish that is giving you omega-3. It's also giving you vitamin D. And that's an important vitamin that often gets missed out on homemade diets. So you're kind of covering your basis if you're feeding small oily fish. You also want to add in a source of iodine. Iodine is necessary for thyroid health. So this is where you might see things like kelp. You only need a little bit of it, but you need to make sure that it's in the diet. You also want a source of vitamin E. That might be something like wheat germ oil or wheatgrass, barley grass, that kind of a thing. You also want something like a blue mussel, which is going to help support with manganese. Manganese, again, the dog only needs a little bit, but that's a really important component for supporting things like joint health, for example, ligaments. I also recommend adding in a variety of seeds. So you're kind of hitting some of the micronutrients, and even topping up some of the zinc, as an example. So things like pumpkin seeds, sunflower seeds, those are really great for giving additional support as well as giving fiber. A caveat with seeds, you always want to make sure that you soak them. in order to remove the phytic acid. Phytic acid is what we call an anti-nutrient, and that can block the absorption in the body of other nutrients. So by soaking it overnight and also you discard the water and then grinding the seeds, that makes it much more bioavailable for the dog. And what I mean, if you're not familiar with the term bioavailable, that just refers to how easy it is for the dog's body to absorb the nutrients from that particular food. So that's kind of our base for how we start to think about putting a diet together. But that is predicated upon also variety, to your point, of different types of proteins, different types of bones, different types of organ meat that you want to include in the diet.
Well, that is brilliant. And I'm just thinking about Teddy's diet, and generally he has oily fish, at least on one of the meals a day. You didn't mention eggs.
Getting to that. Yes. So eggs are another component that are really vital. And you want to rotate between different types of eggs if you can as well. So thinking about chicken eggs or duck eggs or quail eggs, that kind of a thing, that you start to create a bit of variety. What I tend to do is think about that in tandem or in kind of conversation with the oily fish. So for me, when I'm feeding Lucky, the day that he's getting oily fish, he doesn't get an egg. The day that he gets an egg, he doesn't get an oily fish. So you can kind of alternate with it.
Yeah, that's actually really useful to hear that. So yes, I'm just processing what you said, and I've got loads of questions. So this is absolutely brilliant, and actually very simple. I want to bring you back to protein, because there's all this talk that dogs can have too much protein, which seems very peculiar to me, because that's what they would be eating left to their own devices. Can you explain why it is that some people have this idea?
There's a lot of different mythologies around there about what a dog actually needs. But again, when it comes to certain disease states, you might want to consider the amount of protein. This gets talked about quite a bit with kidney disease as an example, but even the research that I have done on kidney disease, and kidney disease is kind of my passion. Lucky has kidney disease, and this is what kind of catapulted me into specifically getting into canine nutrition, and it was part of my literature review in my nutrition studies. We talk quite a bit about towards end stage kidney disease that you want to feed the dog less protein because it puts less of a burden on the kidneys for processing. And that's where you would be adding in different carbohydrates to make up the calories so that there's some level of energy for the dog. But even through studies, there are debates about whether or not that's actually necessary. So again, there's no one right way. This is where I would work with a professional to assess whether or not you need to be concerned about your dog's protein levels. We also look at blood tests that will give us an indicator, especially for something like kidney disease, if there is blood, if there's protein in the urine, that sort of a thing, that we would then look at making alterations. But in general, most dogs don't have an issue with protein. That is what they are designed to eat.
No, that's why I've always been somewhat astounded when I come across people saying this. It makes no sense to me. Okay, so now variety is a wonderful thing if your dog doesn't have allergies. So very often allergies, and my interest in this is because Teddy has had allergies since he was just under a year old. And this is what got me interested in looking at nutrition, and it's been a huge learning curve. So how do we provide variety for a dog with allergies? And is there a way of getting rid of the allergies?
So I'll address what an allergy is. True allergies are very rare. So what you're actually referring to is an intolerance. And I make the difference because we use the terms interchangeably, but they mean different things to the body and how we deal with it. So when we're talking allergy, that's roughly like 1% to 2% of dogs, a true allergy. And that would present something like we see peanut allergies in humans, where there's an anaphylactic response in the body. That's what an allergy is. When we're talking about intolerances or sensitivities, that is often indicative of an issue in the gut. What's generally happening, you might have heard the term leaky gut. And that's when, to kind of give people who may not be familiar with it, the intestinal lining is made up of a barrier of cells that literally come together in what they call tight junctions. So if I'm using my hands to kind of demonstrate what that would look like, it's cells kind of coming up like this. Leaky gut starts to take place when those tight junctions become a little bit loose. And what happens and why this is an issue and why it contributes to things like sensitivities and intolerances is that when the dog, this is exactly the same for us, it's the same process. When we or our dog eats something and there is leaky gut taking place here, there's the possibility of pathogens, of undigested food, often proteins, that can cross the barrier into the bloodstream. And what the body does is it issues an immune response to that, right? So it's noticed this shouldn't be here. Why is this here? It's a foreign object and launches an immune response. So that's where you will see things like gut issues, skin issues, the things we sort of associate and we call allergies, but it's a different response in the body. It's not the same thing as a true allergy. So what we want to do when we're addressing sensitivities and intolerances like that, we want to understand what is actually causing it. We always go to the gut. So there's, like I said, there's generally that kind of gap. So we want to be looking at some gut healing. But this is where doing things like elimination diets with the guidance of a professional can be really helpful to understand what is the issue that is causing it. Sometimes it's the proteins. Sometimes it's synthetic additives in a food, as an example, right? So you might think I'm feeding a kibble, a beef kibble, and they're having this issue. It might not actually be beef that's the problem. It might be an additive or a food coloring or something like that that is creating the issue. But when you start to track and you do an elimination diet to figure out what is actually causing this, then what you can effectively do is make sure you're removing all traces of that, including in the treats. So you want to, this is where sort of like a clean eating approach becomes really useful, where you're monitoring everything. You remove anything that you think is the specific issue. You do some gut healing work. And then most times I've seen that the dogs, you can slowly reintroduce the thing that was causing the problem. So in terms of answering your question, how do you get on this? Can you actually solve it? You can solve it. You actually can get to the root of it, but it's understanding why that has taken place in the first place. It's getting to the root of the issue, not just symptom treating.
And I think too that it requires confidence, because, Teddy had for the longest time two meats that he could have. And thankfully, he could have sardines and anything from the sardine family. So sardines, pilchards, that kind of thing. And he can have eggs, and that's great. But for years, that's what I did. And he has got a very clean diet because his treats are all pure protein. And all the while, I've been wanting to have the courage to try new things. And I think really it's only in the last year that I've started to give him little bits of other things to see. So now I know he's okay with beef. That's, it's fine. But I'm still scared to give it to him too often, lest it should, all go wrong. He's okay with pheasant. Brilliant. That's wonderful. I can have some confidence in giving him pheasant. And I can have some confidence about giving him bits of chicken. And I think that's the thing, is that I don't want to go through what we went through at the start for his sake, not just mine, but for his sake. Partly also because he's become extremely resistant to vet visits and anything to do with his ears. He's extremely sensitive because he had ear infections that came about because of the allergies. So, I'm always, surreptitiously looking in his ears to make sure they're okay. But, the idea of cleaning his ears, no, it's never going to happen. He's just not going to let me do that. So there's, I think for us, when we're living with an animal and we've seen him go through whatever the health issue is, having that confidence that it's going to be okay is really hard won, isn't it?
It is. It is. And you're speaking a lot of my journey. I mean, I was very afraid, Lucky had kidney issues and he also had real gut issues. And I didn't know what was causing it. And I didn't know how to get to the root of it. And my vet, as lovely as she was, and she said, we're not trained in nutrition, so I don't know how to really support you with this. That's where I did all the deep dive and essentially repurposed my doctorate, the skills, my research skills into going down those rabbit holes. But I think something that I'll share with listeners that might be helpful for them, which is my kind of signature fetch framework that I co-developed with my friend and colleague Stacey Renfrey of Hozo Hounds, because we were starting to see when we were meeting with clients that there's a need for a kind of repeatable framework that gives you some support for how you start to address what's going on. So I'll kind of walk you through what FETCH is. It's an acronym, and how we use it and how you can use it with your own dog as well. So we're looking at FETCH being the 5 pillars for how you support your dog's health. F starts with fresh food. So as much fresh food as you can get your dog on, the better. That is going to be doing wonders for their gut microbiome, which is also linked to the leaky gut issue and all of this. Everything is tied together. Everything is interconnected. So I often talk about when we're looking at nutrition, it's more for me nourishment, which is nutrition in relationship. I use the kind of the approach of traditional Chinese medicine, which always has the adage of in relation to what? So always asking whatever you're doing in relation to what. That starts to give you an approach of pulling the other pieces together and seeing where you can make adjustments. So we start with fresh food. The next layer of that is energetics, borrowing directly from traditional Chinese medicine, which takes the approach that every living being has an energetic profile of there are multiple aspects to this, but kind of the first and primary one would be from cool to warm. And we all know people that are like hot no matter what the temperature is, or cold no matter what the temperature is. It's the same for our dogs, and it's the same for everything that we eat. So we can use that as a way of bringing the body back into balance by looking at tempering a cool dog with warmer foods and a warm dog with cooler foods, for example. But again, then in relation to what? When it's the summer, we make some changes. When it's the winter, we make some changes. So it's being willing to adjust and be in relationship. But oftentimes, if you've kind of changed the diet to a fresh food diet and you're still having issues, that second layer of looking at what is your dog's energetics and what are the energetics of primarily the proteins that you're feeding. So from a Chinese medicine lens, dis-ease happens when you take a cool dog and you push them into cold, and you take a warm dog and you push them into hot. That's where inflammation happens for each of those kind of profiles. So, for example, my dog Lucky is a cool dog. If I were to feed him cooling proteins like duck all the time, I'm going to push him well into cold, and I'm going to create the issues like yeast, like inflammation in his body. So what I do is I balance for him by feeding warming proteins, especially now in the winter. So looking at like lamb and venison and goat, those kinds of things. So that might be the next layer, that understanding your dog's energetic profile, what I call energetic paw print, and adjusting the types of proteins to support that might actually resolve the issue.
How do you determine what this would be?
What your dog's energetic paw print is? Observation. I actually have a free guide on my learnfetch.com website in our starter pack. I can leave the link with listeners that walks you through some questions to look at, but basically get good at observing. So some easy things to notice is a cool dog. I'll use Lucky as an example. He's very laid back in the mornings. He's not keen to get up and rush around. He loves to snuggle. He loves to be under the covers whenever he can. He can be a little bit fearful. So some cool dogs are a little bit kind of standoffish, a little bit worried, he will seek the sun to sunbathe all year round. All year round. He loves it. A warm dog will absolutely avoid the sun. So if you're going out in the summer on the walks, they're trying to find the shade to walk in. They're exclusively looking to walk in that. They also, from a personality perspective, they tend to be more in your face and they're up and ready to go right as the day starts. Like they see you move and they're like, right, let's go, let's breakfast, whatever. You know, they're eager to start. They can be more vocal. So they're kind of talkative, like at you kind of thing. So those are some of the traits. They don't like to snuggle for very long. They get too hot and they'll move away from you. They don't like to be under blankets. Those are some kind of basic ones to start to observe. And again, you want to ask in relation to what? So you're kind of observing your dog over the seasons, like lucky pants in the summer. But that's normal because it's hot outside. But that doesn't mean he's a hot dog. I start to look at how is he all year round. A warm dog will be panting in the winter as well. You'll notice that kind of a thing. So you start to see those patterns. And what we want for all bodies is to come into a balance. So it's not about exclusively feeding warm dog cooling proteins and exclusively feeding a cool dog warming proteins. You create a balance to bring the body into a more neutral state. That's what the body is trying to do. So that's a layer of support that if you're noticing, I've already switched to fresh food, but I'm still seeing some issues. That might be your next layer. Your next question is, am I feeding proteins that are appropriate for my dog for this season? And what if you start to shift that? You might see a change as well.
I love that. And it's interesting because as many people who are watching this will suddenly think, well, my dog has elements of both. And I think what people need to realize is that this is always on a spectrum.
Yeah.
And it's that nuance. So Teddy, like Lucky, is extremely laid back in the morning and not in a hurry to get up. And really, he loves a snuggle in the evenings, in the cold weather, not in the summer. Extremely affectionate, but he's definitely a warm dog in every other respect because he is vocal, he is active, he is busy, and he certainly will interact with you and make sure that you're interacting with him. So there's elements of both there. And I like what you said about, keeping everything in balance. So when we're talking about keeping everything in balance, do we mean rotating different types of meat? Do we mean how would you do this? I guess is a good question.
From a diet perspective of
Yes.
balance in the diet, yes, you want to rotate through different types of proteins. You also want to rotate through different types of cuts of meat because they have different, we know so a chicken breast has a different nutrient profile to like dark meat, to the chicken thighs. So you can create variety even within the same type of protein. I also recommend if you're feeding raw meaty bones that you make a rotation of different types of bones. So maybe you're giving a bit of carcass. And again, this will be dependent upon your dog's ability to deal with raw meaty bones, their familiarity with that, the size of the dog, all of that. But you want to rotate through appropriate bones for your dog's size and age and ability to handle bones, different types. So like with Lucky, I will go through, to give you an idea, Lucky's about 4.5 kilos. He's a Chihuahua mix. So he does well with things like chicken wings, duck wings, chicken carcass, duck carcass, the sort of softer, but also pork ribs he does well with, but some of the bigger things he can't tolerate. So I make sure that I'm giving him a variety of different options because they all have different nutrient profiles.
So what about the concern that people might have about, a tooth breaking? And I ask because I don't know how he did it, but Teddy broke a tooth on something. It was not a bone. And so it's made me nervous now of giving him bones. The vet said his teeth are really, really strong, but nevertheless, we've got, one tooth less because somehow he broke a tooth. So how do we navigate this?
There's always a risk with anything. So that's one to be aware of. There is going to be a risk with it. You also want to monitor your dogs and always aim for the softer bones. So you never want to be feeding a weight-bearing bone. So that would be something like a leg, which is why and even in terms of like ribs are a great option for a lot of dogs, but I tend to steer away from beef ribs because they're bigger. It's a bigger animal. The bone is more dense. So I tend to steer clear of that and look for more softer bones, like poultry, bird bones are really good, especially for small to medium-sized dogs. I would avoid turkey wings for a dog of Lucky size. Those are too big. But a lot of German Shepherds can handle that no problem. So that's where you're looking at the size of the dog and how they can handle it. And also their familiarity with eating bones. I always guide people on slowly introducing bones to your dog and almost teaching them how to deal with it at first. Don't leave them unattended with a bone. Depending on your dog and how they respond to this, it might be that you're holding one end of the bone to begin with, right? And getting them to chew it.
Yeah, I've
Get
done
used to it.
because I used to give Teddy bones when he was before the allergies, and then with the allergies, I couldn't get bones of the meats that he could have, so I stopped doing that. And then I reintroduced him to bones, and I realized he'd forgotten what to do with a bone, and so I did hold it in my hand, one end, and said to him, you try the other one, try the other one. And it didn't take him long
Yeah.
to go off with the bone. He particularly likes marrow bones, but I'm careful about that because it can upset his tummy.
Also, I don't feed marrow bones as a bone because they are very dense. So
Yeah.
I wouldn't recommend that as a raw meaty bone
No.
for eating for calcium. No. And also marrow bones, a lot of dogs end up with issues where they get it stuck on their jaw. So, oops, sorry. So I tend to avoid that and I avoid any of the sort of smoked bones that you see in pet stores. When I'm talking about raw meaty bones, I'm talking raw chicken wings, raw chicken carcass, raw duck carcass. It has meat on it. And they're still eating that meat. So avoid anything that has been cooked, avoid rawhide, that's not a real bone, all of that kind of stuff. And go for the softer ones. That's how you avoid tooth issues.
And the thing I've realized that since I've been getting more confident with all of this is that actually feeding my dog is really easy.
It
I'm,
is when you know what to feed.
yeah, I'm going shopping for me. I'm going shopping for him. It's not a big thing. I'm not looking at pet food. I haven't bought, so-called pet food for years. I just haven't. And it's really simple because it's just normal food. And some of it I cook and some of it I don't. So when you said gently cooking, I slow cook
Hmm.
meat.
Yes.
Funnily enough, I slow cook meat for us as well,
Hmm.
because I believe that's more gentle. So would you recommend a slow cook as a
Yeah.
gentle way of cooking meat?
Yeah, a slow cooker. And the thing to be aware of when you are slow cooking, when you're cooking meat for your dogs, is the fat content of the meat. Dogs do better in tolerating fat from raw meat. So when you cook it, we always want to look for like 7% or less fat. So when you're going to the grocery store and you're looking at mince, don't get the 20% mince and cook it. I would look at getting the 7% fat or roughly I usually go for like 5 to 7% fat.
Okay, well now that's really useful because what you're saying is fat's okay if it's raw, but there's something that changes when you cook fat. And it's interesting because I've found that myself, that I can have, cream and all sorts of wonderful fats, but certain fried
Hmm.
fat can upset me.
Yeah, and it can cause pancreatitis in dogs. So that's one of the fears that people have. And pancreatitis isn't specifically a fat issue. So it's not necessarily about being completely afraid of fats. In fact, there's a lot of research suggesting that high carb diets are part of what's contributing to it. But when you cook a fat, it does change, it does oxidize. So you want to go for lower fat when you're cooking it. And I would still advise for 10% or less fat for raw as well. They don't need a lot of fat, but that is where they get their first kind of energy source from. You'll see them seeking, if you give them an option, they'll seek out fat. Kind of in the wilds, if you will, when we look at street dogs as an example, that's what they tend to do. I also wanted to know as well. So we said carbohydrates are not great for dogs, but I want to clarify between starchy carbs and non-starchy carbs too. This is you'll see it. You'll see people talk about good carbs, bad carbs. I don't like those terms. I don't think that they're helpful. But what I like to talk about is the inclusion of non-starchy carbs for dogs in order to provide a source of fiber and to feed the gut microbes. So what I tend to do is add in things like dark leafy greens as an example to help support Lucky's gut, and what I recommend for clients as well. Also things like coriander, parsley, those sorts of things. Radishes can be really great for dogs. Celery. You don't need a lot. I would say probably like most dogs do well with like say 10 to 15% of the diet being non-starchy carbs, but those are a really wonderful addition for fiber, but they also provide what we call polyphenols. And those are compounds that are only found in plants that have antioxidants, for example, so helping to kind of keep free radicals out of the body. That's where berries, an inclusion of berries can be really good for your dog as well. So I don't want to say that all carbs are bad, but it's the grains and the starchy carbs that I tend to steer clear of for most dogs.
Well, actually, that's not bad advice for humans either, we have discovered.
Yeah.
And what I have realized as is that the diet that works for me is actually the diet that Teddy has. It's a very interesting thing because at first I thought, oh, they're so different from us. Actually, they're not. And I think that's a big clue as to what we are looking at when we're feeding our dogs. A lot of people thrive on the carnivore diet and, or on the paleo diet, which actually is very similar to what we are talking about. And it really is the grains and the starches that they should not be having and that many of us also struggle with. So it's very interesting to see that. Wow, you have been absolutely wonderful at sharing all of this information with us. I am so grateful for your time today.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure. And like I said, if people want some support with how to get started, how to figure out your dog's energetic profile and kind of get started on, I just wanted to mention really quickly that the other letters, so we've got for fetch, fresh food, energetics, targeted support. I find a lot of people have like a supplement graveyard. They don't know where to start. So starting small with one thing. And this is like where an elimination diet really comes into, and track what's working for your dog and what's not working for your dog. C is curiosity. Ask some different questions. If you're not getting the answers you need, maybe another question needs to be asked to help illuminate some things for you. And then H is holistic health. And this pulls everything together. This starts to look at, is the itching maybe not coming from food? And maybe it's coming from you walked in a park that had sprayed pesticides the day before. Right? Or maybe there's something in the house. Maybe it's something like scented candles or it's starting to ask those different questions. That's looking at the environment. And also because I'm Mystic Dog Mama, it's also looking at the energetics from that perspective too. The energies that we're holding and our dogs are holding, they're all intertwined. So that might be another way of opening up a lens that's shedding some light on what's going on when you're trying to figure out, because I understand the frustration and I understand the fear around when something's not right with your dog and it feels like I've tried everything. I'm hoping that fetch actually gives you, that acronym gives you a tool to find hope. and to see that you haven't tried everything. There's always something else, and it might be something you've not necessarily thought of. So I have a free Fetch starter pack at learnfetch.com that you can download and start to figure out your dog's energetic profile. And if listeners figure it out or they're a little bit confused, I'd love to hear. So if they want to get in touch and let me know, if they've got a warm dog or a cool dog or they're not quite sure, I can guide them on that.
Would you give us your website, please, Alexia?
Yes, thank you. So my website, I've got two. It's mysticdogmama.com and learnfetch.com. And you can connect with me on Instagram as well at mysticdogmama.
That's fantastic. I'll be putting the links to all of those in the description box. Alexia, thank you. I think you must come back.
I'd love to. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, thank you again. And thank you all for watching. Now, in the description box, you will find all of the information so that you could find Alexia, but you'll also find a link to my own Substack in which you will find the occasional Mummy and Teddy adventure story. And next time, we're going to be looking at raw feeding. Until next time, goodbye.